to the Playground Bar and Lounge. And I'm staff over at the Confluencenter for Creative Inquiry. And we are the research organization at the U of A that puts this event on. Big thanks to Playground. They're wonderful hosts. We're so happy to be here. So our next show and tell will be the last show and tell of the fall. It's December 10th, and it's going to be with the Dean of the College of Science, Joaquin Ruiz. And he's going to give us an overview of his concept of the geotourism corridor, all the amazing things that Southern Arizona has to offer. And he has a really special, unique take on that, with all of his vast knowledge and connections in this area. So don't be sure to come to that. And then right after, we're going to do something brand new that we've never done before. We're partnering with the UA Institute of the Environment for a event called Playground Games, and it is a speed networking / pitch event. So sort of like speed dating meets the Shark Tank. It's going to be up on the roof here at Playground. 20 faculty are going to meet for the first time, affiliated with Confluencenter, affiliated with Institute of the Environment. They are going to come up with a pitch on the spot, pitch it to a panel of judges, and then get funded on the spot $1,000 to do a group project. So that'll be really fun. That is actually going to be in front of a live audience. So if you're interested in coming to that, make sure you are on our email list, and there's little forms in front of you where you can fill out your name and email. We're going to send out an RSVP for that because the space is very limited. So if you want to check that out, it'll be really fun. Also, if you fill out that form, you'll be entered into our raffle. And we have gift certificates for Playground and Hub and Confluencenter t-shirts. So go ahead and fill those out as well. Make sure you check out Zocalo magazine. There's a wonderful article about Peter and about his films that you're going to see and hear about tonight. You'll get more information from that article. I'm going to introduce to you our director, Javier Duran, director of the Confluencenter for Creative Inquiry.
Thank you, Playground, home away from home in Tucson. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Peter Beudert. Peter is a distinguished professor in the School of Theater, Film, and Television, but not only a distinguished professor, but one of the best educators we have on the U of A campus. His dedication to work with the students and to spend a lot of time making sure they learn the secrets and techniques of stage setting is truly amazing. And I see Peter work with the students, and his patience and his dedication to change the life of young people is really an amazing trait here. So I just want people to know that. You know, sometimes we think about research, creativity, but we forget that we also educate the future of our country and our classroom. So that speaks very well on your behalf. He received his MFA from the University of Wisconsin and his BFA from Boston University. He's a member of United Scenic Artists at his School of Theater, Film and Television Production. Designs include The Kentucky Psycho, The Cider House Rules, Tartuffe, Henry IV, Part 1 and 2, The Who's Tommy, Video Design, Dracula, As You Like It, Taming of the Shrew, and many others. Professional designs include Wit, The Java Game, Video Design, and Tosca, Labor's Lost, Nixon in China, East Hunter Gatherers, and many others. He's also co-author with Scenic Art for the Theater, now in its 3rd edition. And he's also one of the founding colleagues of the Confluencenter. Peter has been part of the Confluencenter since the beginning, and it's hard to believe that in the fall of 2010, we spent a lot of time and effort trying to figure out what this thing was going to be. And he's smiling because all those long hours with no drinks available help to create. What we want to think is it's an amazing organization that in a short period of time has been able to galvanize an existing tradition of interdisciplinary collaborations at the U of A. And tonight Peter's presentation testifies to these efforts at the U of A, and his work done with the history of telescopes, with the whole colleagues in astronomy, and the work done with film, which is he will talk about that, is truly remarkable. So with that, help me welcome Dr. Peter Beudert.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Javier, that was wonderful. Thanks so much. Well, we got started here, and James wanted, and I remember being a young kid and seeing films in grade school. And there was one called Hemo the Magnificent, and if anybody remembers it. Okay, that's good. Roll the tape. That's what they used to say during Hemo the Magnificent. Okay. Who recognizes this image? Anybody? Anybody? What is it? It's the pond. It's a pond on U of A. Why is there a pond on U of A?
Presidential pond.
It's the presidential pond. Very good. And it was there because the president had a house on the U of A campus, and that's a picture of it, that was erected at the end of the 19th century. The house was purchased mail order from Brooklyn, New York, shipped out to Tucson, specified by the president as where the windows and the corridors would be upstairs, and it stood there until 1936 when it was torn down to make way for dormitories. But it's pictures like this that gave me interest in the past of the University of Arizona. Buildings that are no longer there, I find interesting. And obviously, the people who inhabited those buildings had stories to tell about this university that was at one time extremely small and just growing, and on its way to become the university we know now. And some of these pictures, I'm sure you recognize from books you've seen, pictures of Old Main that show the few buildings that used to be around there, and what the environment was like here on this small campus, a long way from downtown. This picture shows some of the earliest buildings, like classroom and then two smaller houses that served both as dormitory and as classroom. And seeing these pictures made me think a little bit differently about what the university was like and what the place used to be like. And I thought there was a story there. The story could have come from the people. Like students who lived in the dorms who were pretty much as neat and tidy as students I know. And this was what it was like also to be a president. You would get bills for mutton and tongue that had to be paid. And that's what a president did. Or you wrote to students and said, I noticed you weren't going to class. Would you please do something about that and see Dr. Grimes? So it's starting to become a little bit more familiar about the history of the university. Just made me think there was a story to be told. And as we came up to the time where the state of Arizona was celebrating the centennial of statehood, I thought one way to mark that would be to create a movie about that. And you can just hold on this picture for a second, because I really, really love this image of Old Main and what I think are three students in the faculty members standing there. So we thought, as members of Confluence, to create some way to memorialize the centennial of statehood. For me, it was about making a film about it and finding this one picture of Old Main and students on it, knowing that I could walk to that same place and stand on the same floorboards where that picture was taken, gave me a physical connection that I thought was important. So if you want to go ahead, do new things. So that was one of the strongest images that helped inspire us to tell a story about the past. And what we decided to do was reenact the campus on the day of statehood in 1912. So we found a room in Old Main, which you can see here, a room which I think now has been subsumed by the new office of the president. This was a little used break room on the second floor. We went to the Smith House on Speedway, which was a faculty house built in 1905. And in it, we recreated a student recital because all students at the U of A were required to do a recital. We went to the second floor of the State Museum on the mall, and in the second floor reading room, we recreated a classroom from Old Main, and we shot a scene of a typical classroom. So for us, it was this sort of snapshot of what this campus was like 100 years ago. When we first presented this movie on February 11, 2012, which is pretty much how we got the title. So that didn't take a whole lot of work. But the film was a great experience to do, and James, you want to go ahead? I think we can just roll the film. Short little film. Enjoy it.
Dear Governor Hunt, as President of the University of Arizona, it brings me great pleasure to send you this report from Tucson on the eve of this territory's long-awaited admission to the Union. After 20 years, the university's enrollment has climbed to an astonishing total of 1,763 students. Our campus is expanding and now comprises 6 modern buildings, including a gymnasium, water tower, and 2 dormitories. The planned construction of an engineering building will help ensure that the University of Arizona will join this nation's elite institutions of higher learning.
For your attention, sir. Another bill for the statehood celebration. From the Confluencenter company for transport to the regions from downtown to campus.
$6 for a carriage? Is it a round trip or one way?
Round trip, sir.
Ye gods. Statehood is going to be expensive. I hope it's worth it.
Whether or not pi is a normal number is still an open question. As we know, a normal number is such that each digit will occur in equal proportion. But let's begin with an even more basic question. What is the formal definition of pi? Mr. Goldsmith.
Dr. Grimes, sir. Yes, pi is equal to the ratio of the circle's circumference to its diameter. But I have discovered that if you measure the circumference of your head, divide by pi, then round off to the nearest 1/8 inch, you can determine your hat size.
Fascinating, Mr. Goldsmith. Perhaps we could find a more practical use of pi. To find the area of a part of a circle, the formula is distance where k is equal to the area of the circle, and n is equal to deviation in degrees of freedom. This is essentially just
The future of the University of Arizona is one with the state. Let us grow and prosper together. Very truly yours, Arthur Wilde, President.
Now everybody will remember the definition of pi. No problem. That film obviously was a couple of years ago when we made it, and in doing the research for that film, we were convinced that there were other stories to tell about the university. A lot of stories. And I should mention that I said he. I want to refer to Michael Mulcahy, who directed that film and is directing the next project we're working on. He couldn't be here with me tonight, but he's an important member of the production of these films. Michael's been extremely patient in the fact that I've never made a film in my life, because I come from a background of theater as a stage designer, and it's been a real joy for me to explore this world of filmmaking and be able to do it with Michael Cyrus, and I thank him for it. Well, we saw many stories, as I said, about the university, potential stories, and the people that were here, people that aren't here, the buildings that were here and the buildings that are, and what this university has accomplished. So if you want to go ahead, you can start looking at what stories we may talk about. And for us, the obvious choice for our next story was going to be about this building. I'm sure you all recognize as Steward Observatory. And to tell the story of Steward Observatory, it comes hand in hand with the story of this man, Andrew Douglass, who came here in 1906 and remained on the faculty until his death in 1962. Andrew Douglass founded Steward Observatory, among other things. Why do we tell a story about a small white building on campus? I think it's the most significant building on campus. I think it might be the most significant building in the state of Arizona. It is representative of an act of great courage that Douglass took when he came here. As you remember, he came here in 1906. And if you remember from the film that we just saw, the student population by 1912 was around 1,300. In 1906, it was considerably smaller, as you would well imagine. This was a very, very small school. And in 1906, he came here and said, this university with a few hundred students and a couple of dozen teachers needs a major investment in research. Didn't go over very popularly with neither the regents nor the territorial legislature at the time. But he proposed it, and that was his vision. And that story in and of itself, how Steward Observatory came to be, is, I think, remarkable. But even more remarkable are the repercussions since Steward Observatory was created. It came to be because a woman, Lavinia Steward, donated a sizable amount, $60,000. And what became of that investment? Well, all of you who are familiar with Steward Observatory know that it is much more than the single building. It became an enterprise, a truly global enterprise that is easily considered as a world leader in the science and technology of astronomy. So that $60,000 investment was truly significant. The presence of Steward Observatory changed the relationship between the university and us, this community, the city of Tucson, the state of Arizona, because it was Douglass who felt compelled and driven to make sure that people from all over had the opportunity to come and look through the telescope and understand the universe and see things they could never have seen otherwise. And through that, they could understand what universities do and what happens in those buildings. And that relationship started with Douglass and has never stopped. And that's an important thing that took place because it's Steward Observatory. And another thing that took place happened shortly after World War II. Towards the end of the war, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said that the effort the United States put into World War II, that energy should be directed to benefit the country to build a thing that became the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health, that this country could marshal its forces for advancement, for our economy, and for the betterment of our people. And from that decision of the creation of the National Science Foundation, it was soon decided that the United States needed a national center for astronomical research, a national observatory, and in 1955, Aidan Meinel was hired to direct what became Kitt Peak. And of course, Kitt Peak, 45 miles that way. And we are the closest university. We had a major observatory, and I think one important question to think about and answer maybe for yourself, would Kitt Peak have existed here if it weren't for the presence of that little white building over there? And that's important. That also changed the university. And thinking also about why in the world do we do research anyway? What's the value of research? Andrew Douglas, when Steward Observatory was dedicated, Andrew Ellicott Douglas at the dedication said, research is knowledge acquired before it is needed. Right? Why do we land on a comet? 10 years and how many millions of dollars? I don't know. But I'm glad we did. I would not want to live in a world where we said that's not worth it. We can do that. Maybe we'll find something crucial. And that's what Douglas believed into, and that's one reason why we have Steward Observatory. So posing those kinds of questions gave us inspiration to make this film. So Jamie, if you want to go forward a little bit, I will stop talking eventually, believe me. So Steward Observatory, as you all know, I'm sure, opened in 1923. And it was, once again, Andrew Ellicott Douglas who was the driving force behind it. But if you Google Douglas, it doesn't say anything about Steward Observatory, at least not on Wikipedia. He's better known for being the founder of the Science of Dendrochronology, right? We have dendrochronology fans here. And he founded the Laboratory for Tree Ring Research, all of which he did within a decade after opening Steward Observatory. Man was tireless, he was visionary, and an incredible human being. The story of how he came here, I think, is one of the interesting stories to tell. So let's go ahead and tell that story. Andrew Douglas was born in Vermont. He's a New Englander. There he is at the age of 18. He got a bachelor's degree in physics. And that was the end of his formal education. After completing his bachelor's degree, he was hired by Harvard College Observatory and went to South America on a 2-year-long expedition on the benefit of Harvard to create their Southern Observatory, which is known as the Southern Station in Peru. When he came back to Boston from that trip, he met this man, Percival Lowell, who was a Harvard graduate, very wealthy industrialist, with a deep fascination in astronomy, and Percival Lowell believed there were canals on Mars. And he wanted his own observatory to study Mars, so he hired the young A.E. Douglas to come to Arizona, and Douglas decided where to place the observatory, and he built it himself. And he ran the observatory, was the principal investigator for a number of years until he publicly disagreed with Percival Lowell and said, there's not enough evidence to back your claim that there are canals. So he was fired. Out of work for a couple of years, and in 1906 came to the University of Arizona. And almost immediately, he created a department of astronomy which did not exist, and almost immediately he started campaigning for a large telescope. And it wasn't until 1916 when Mrs. Lavinia Stewart decided to bequeath $60,000 in memory of her husband, Henry Stewart, and that money would be directed to support Douglas's vision of creating a telescope. So, once again, part of what this film asks is, what was the outcome of a donation? Like $60,000. It was sizable. It was the biggest donation, private donation given to the university at that time, right? But it's important to understand that the money, sometimes the figure isn't as much, it's about the total payoff and what comes out of that. So, Jamie, I think we can go ahead. Of course, with that $60,000, the observatory got built. And with the $60,000, the telescope inside the observatory was completed and shipped to Arizona. But it was about 30 years after the completion of the observatory where things really started to change in a significant way. And this, of course, was with the coming of Kit Peak. In the early 60s, Kit Peak, the location was chosen. Aidan Meinel was the director. And because of the link between Kit Peak, Aidan Meinel, and the university, whose president at the time was Richard Harville, who was the president for 20 years, Richard Harville also decided to invest in astronomy. So they took the opportunity. The Department of Astronomy expanded. They moved out of their one-room building into an expansion. The telescope was removed from the observatory on campus, as with its 36-inch mirror, which is a story into itself. And then both of those were carried up to the top of Kit Peak to become the second Steward Observatory. And here's a picture of Aidan Meinel standing on a roof, which you couldn't get away with nowadays, at the opening of the new Steward Observatory. And within a few years, the Bach telescope, the 90-inch reflecting telescope, was dedicated, once again with Aidan Meinel being director then of Steward Observatory. Aidan Meinel went on to found the college, what is now the College of Optical Sciences, right? Simultaneous with that, we saw the development of an institution, an academic institution. I'm sure many of you are familiar with here at the university, the Lunar Planetarium. How prophetic that we can talk about this today. I'm still just amazed what's happened with Philae landing on the comet. It's just an incredible achievement. In 1961, as you all know, John Kennedy just announced that we were going to go to the moon. NASA needed accurate maps of the moon, and there were two people in the world who could study the moon and had studied the moon. One of whom was Gerard Kuiper, who was here at the university at that time. Gerard Kuiper was behind Ranger 7, the first vehicle to take live pictures of the moon, sending back to Earth. Kuiper was on television during that historic event, broadcasting from JPL in Los Angeles, came back to the University of Arizona as a new star, which he was in many ways. But it was through Kuiper's influence that NASA was investing in the University of Arizona, and another major telescope was built in Mount Bigelow. So maybe we'll pause here for 1 second, Jim. So we have Aidan Meinel and Gerard Kuiper picking up from the foundation that Douglass had left with the creation of the observatory, and we see the physical expansion of the institution that is Steward Observatory onto Kit Peak and onto Mount Bigelow. And the next major step forward takes place in the 1970s. A multiple mirror telescope, the first major multiple mirror telescope in the world, was built, designed by Aidan Meinel, built by Peter Schmidtmeyer, who becomes director of Steward Observatory, remains director for 32 years, and also built with mirrors at a newly created Steward Observatory mirror lab, and thus the first major, as you can see on Mount Raymond, a multiple mirror telescope is built, which happened to be refitted with a single mirror constructed also at Steward Observatory Mirror Lab after 1998. So another major institution under the name of Steward Observatory. I want to reflect a little bit about the presence of the observatory in Tucson. The official dedication was 1923. They had opened their doors a couple of years before that. And from their opening in the early 1920s to this day, without interruption, at least once a month, the doors to Steward Observatory open to the public. And if we think about what Douglas did, even before he had Steward Observatory. When he came here and he said, I'm starting a department of astronomy, I need a telescope. He contacted his former employer at Harvard College Observatory and borrowed an 8-inch refracting telescope, which was installed in the attic of what was then the science building just next door to me, in what's now the communications building. To this day, if you're interested, you can go up there. There's still a gigantic skylight that used to slide open where that telescope was. And it was from that time in 1908 that Douglas believed the public should come and look through the telescope. As Douglas himself said, look into the heavens so we can better understand ourselves, about self-knowledge. And he believed in that. So some of the conviction he held behind the creation of the observatory was make this instrument available for people, for the general public, non-stop. And it's become an institution. And Douglas took these two photos that I think are really interesting. One of a mountain. Jamie, let's just start with this one, because I don't know if anybody here is familiar with this picture. Do you recognize the building? You know the picture.
San Javier.
San Javier Mission, as seen from the campus of the University of Arizona. A photograph Douglas took through that small 8-inch telescope he borrowed from Harvard, just to demonstrate to the public, you can do something extraordinary. Even if it's looking at the world you know, you've never seen it like this. So he was very conscious of involving the public and taking that next step of getting people to come to the University of Arizona. So what happened with Mrs. Stewart's money and what's taken place with Steward did then? It has grown exponentially. 2 sky survey locations, Mount Bigelow, Mount Lemmon, the Large Binocular Telescope on Mount Hopkins, just to mention a few of the optical observing places. The United Kingdom Infrared Telescope, with which we just took over last week in Hawaii, 2 significant radio telescope installations around the peaks of Tucson, and then branching farther out to the high plains on the Antarctic Peninsula, and in Chile, the Magellan Telescope, soon to be eclipsed by the giant Magellan Telescope, which is being built here at the University of Arizona. And from the Lunar and Planetary Lab, the HiRISE camera, which is orbiting Mars, taking these high-resolution images, and soon to be launched OSIRIS-REx mission to land on an asteroid and return the sample to Earth, also coming out of the LPL. So let's just pause there for a sec, because a $60,000 investment paid off that. Pretty good return for the money, right? And I know as the university makes investment today, we need to know what the return is. But we need to, I think, also believe that as we take bold steps into the future, creating Confluence, one of them, right? We may not see immediate results. It took 30 years for Steward Observatory to really start to change and become something else. But I think it's without a doubt that we can say the University of Arizona is not only world-class in astronomy, it is the world. It is the world. Well, based on that, Michael and I made a film. We didn't do, in terms of format, like the previous movie, which I love to call a costume drama. This is more traditional interviews and research. So I think I'll let the film speak for itself. Jamie, please. Thank you.
Humans have always looked to the night sky and wondered about our existence. Where are we? Who are we? Are we alone? Astronomers today address these same questions using instruments of vast power to look far back in time and across distant space. Some of their tools are telescopes based on land. Other instruments are stationed in space itself. In 2018, the James Webb Space Telescope will be launched from Earth to a position 1 million miles away. Its mission is to study the early formation of the universe. The Webb Telescope will carry 4 scientific instruments. One of them is the near-infrared camera, whose principal investigator is University of Arizona astronomer Dr. Marcia Reiki.
There's a lot of controversy, obviously, about things like global warming. And there are planets in our own solar system where there have been runaway greenhouse effects, like the planet Venus. And we're now on the brink of being able to observe weather and temperature extremes on exoplanets. And we may get a much better handle about what goes on the Earth as a planet by studying other ones.
Advancing these complex missions are governmental, educational, and private entities who combine people and money on unprecedented scales.
A lot of astronomy wouldn't exist without fairly large amounts of taxpayers' money. I mean, the James Webb Space Telescope is a good example at $8.8 billion. What does the public get out of that? Well, we can bring up all the things about the technological spin-offs and things, but the fundamental reason to do it is to learn stuff about the universe.
Learning stuff about the universe has long driven astronomers, but it is only recently that such massive projects have been possible. The roots of modern astronomy lie in humble wood-framed observatories tended by devoted and sometimes fanatical amateurs. Southern Arizona has played a primary role in the transformation of modern astronomy. It is home to the world's major telescopes. Some reside on the peaks surrounding Tucson. The mirrors for others are designed and built in the Steward Observatory Mirror Lab. Still other instruments are created by astronomers and optical scientists and are destined for the outer reaches of the solar system. This foundation was laid over 100 years ago by one man, Andrew Douglass. Like many astronomers of that time, he had more practical experience than formal education. But like astronomers of today, Douglass had a belief in the immeasurable value of scientific research. At the age of 40, A.E. Douglass started a new career, teaching geography and physics at a small university with a few hundred students, the University of Arizona.
Arizona, in its early days, picked up rugged individualists. They decided what they wanted to do, and they got out and they did it.
A lot of the pioneers in science, of that order, anything over a century ago, were completely multi-talented. The world was smaller, and the science enterprise was smaller, and people weren't as specialized, and there was a kind of wild frontier, so you had to make it up as you went along.
Within 1 year, he was in charge of the newly created Department of Physics and Astronomy. By 1910, A.E. Douglass was acting president of the University of Arizona.
From the very moment he arrived in 1906, Douglass wanted to build a major astronomical facility in Tucson to rival the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff.
There were only 3 larger telescopes in the United States. So he was trying to do something fairly substantial.
In October of 1916, they were able to announce to the press that Mrs. Lavinia Stewart had given a $60,000 grant to the University of Arizona. It was the largest private grant that the university had received up until that point.
It took 7 years to build Douglass's telescope. World War I seriously affected resources for research-grade instruments.
Douglass is the architect who designed the building. He's the one that decided the size and scope of the telescope and how it would be designed. And he would also decide on the scientific program to begin with at the observatory.
The telescope came to Tucson in pieces, the main body from Cleveland, the mirror from Buffalo. It was brought from the Tucson train depot to the observatory by horse-drawn wagon.
He had his first public meeting in September of 1942. He opened the observatory to the general public because he wanted them to share in the wonders that were to be discovered by his telescope.
Although it took some time from the dedication of the 36-inch telescope on campus till the real expansion of astronomy in Arizona, I believe that that expansion in the 50s would not have occurred if the 36-inch telescope, the Steward Observatory, had not been founded.
When it was built, there was nothing there, right, except this single building, and the photographs show it all out on its own. And think about, what now, how the campus has developed, in part, as you say, because of the roots that or the focus that provided.
I try and play the game of visualizing the campus back in the 20s and 30s, and I've seen some photos that sort of help with it, but it is hard to imagine. And also hard to imagine being on the sort of edge of Tucson at that time, and maybe the sky being as dark as it must have been. So I just sort of imagine that, as a sort of rock where the river or the lake sort of grew and enveloped it and surrounded it and went far beyond it. And this huge university of 40,000 students, grew up around it.
Great, well that's an excerpt from what is intended to be a 30-minute session. Fascinating subject, a lot of stories to tell in it, but we're moving forward with it. So I think we'll just open up for questions. If anybody has any questions, anything they want to know about this. Definition of mind. Okay, otherwise, I want to thank everybody for attending. I certainly want to thank Playground for hosting this event. It's been great.
Somebody has a question. No, it's just... Oh, I have a question. Yeah. Why do you care about
Heather wants to know why I care about astronomy because I'm a stage designer. I think I grew up in the 60s, which was a great time if you have any interest in space. But I think I care more about, I think we're losing this a little bit. For me, I think it's just telling these stories that I don't think are that well known about this university. And I think that's really the interest here. It's about telling stories that people have made great decisions and decisions that have great impact on our lives. Those are stories certainly worth letting know. I think sometimes this university has a habit of hiding its light under a basket a little bit. And why should we do that when we're the world leader in astronomy?
What can the public see of all of these events, these buildings and so forth?
In terms of actually visiting them, well, I know the Mirror Lab has visits for it that you can visit. Kid Peak has a fabulous visitor center that I don't know if you've been there or not, but many of its buildings are accessible. The Mount Lemmon Sky Center, which I did not show in this, is another public viewing location that is operated by Steward Observatory. And of course, the old observatory itself has at least once a month public lectures and opportunities for the public to go into the old observatory. There's a telescope, a 21-inch telescope that was put in there shortly after Douglass's telescope was pulled out. So all of those are available to the public. Once again, thanks everybody. Thanks.